Welcome to the Times of Industry show. I am very excited to have a returning guest, a good friend of mine, John Rubino, dollarcollapse.com, phenomenal website, great articles and content for years and years, very known on YouTube and everywhere else. If you're a fan of John, this is going to be a great chance to catch up. If you're new, John's very influential in terms of what he's saying about the dollar, the national debt. He brings a lot of data to the picture, and it's always good to check in with John Rubino. So thank you, sir, for being with us.
Good to be back, Lior. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. In sort of a quarantine here. They let you go 0.6 of a mile right now because it's there's a lot of Jewish holidays in September. Then there's a lot of congregations, so that's why they're quarantining, to make sure that basically the people that are more religious, that go to synagogues, etc., that they don't create mass infections and overwhelm the hospital system. But our death count here in Israel is pretty low. We're about 1,400 deaths thus far. So nothing.
Well, good.
Nothing crazy.
Hopefully we get past this soon, because it really has changed everyone's life. Some more so than others, but those of us that work online, it's not all that different, except for wearing masks everywhere you go. But there are a lot of people whose job it is to be around people during the day, and that this must have been a 6-month nightmare for them. So I hope it ends soon for everybody's sake.
Yeah. Also, obviously, there's the burden of not burden, but obviously there's more time responsibility with children because the schools are out. So you have to find solutions for that while you're doing work, and it's been challenging for many people here. So there's a bit of rioting, but there's not violence. There's never been a conflict, an internal conflict here for as long as I've lived here, where there's been actual, violence or something like that within the country. Obviously, with the surroundings, it's endless. I do want to ask you, John, about something that's coming up here in 1 month. So we're doing this interview on the 6th of November. 1 month, there's an election. Do you want to give us your prediction?
Yeah, I think it's completely unpredictable at this point because first of all, the pandemic is making it physically really difficult to run an election, because they don't know whether to have people vote in person or whether to do it via mail-in ballots. And some states aren't experienced enough with mail-in ballots to necessarily be able to do it well. And that kind of points towards a really contentious election where let's say it's close going into voting day, and a lot of mail-in ballots come and they're contested, and the voting or the counting goes on for a long time, and it's weeks before we find out who wins, and the losing side doesn't accept the validity of the election, and we get civil unrest because of that. That's the worst case scenario, but it's not an extremely improbable scenario. That could happen. On the other hand, maybe this is just like Y2K, where remember back in the late 1990s, we were afraid that when the date clicked over to 2000, computers would crash everywhere. And because people saw that coming, they were able to fix it in time, and it turned out to be a non-event. And maybe that's the way voting during a pandemic will go for us. Maybe we'll figure it out and avoid some kind of a constitutional crisis, but the possibility of that is looming out there. So we just have to get through this and hope 1 month from today, we know who's going to be the next president, and everybody agrees that that's the case, and there's no issue about who was robbed and whether they're in the streets over it and stuff like that. But you can't know. So it's just something we have to get through.
Something that I really think about a lot in terms of both of the candidates, but just in general, the last 4 years since Trump has been elected, it looks like the president is not, or the candidates, doesn't matter, the parties are not trying to speak and direct their message to the entire country. it's almost like they've given up on all the people that they know will not vote for them. And they're not even trying to appease them or bring them into one unified message. Um, and, and and I want to get your take on this. And as an American, I'm not American, so as an American, I'm asking you: do you see this as well, where the president would speak, and you know that 100% this would antagonize about 50% of the country, and then the Democrats will speak, and you know for a fact that 50% of the people will not agree to it and will not compromise. There will be no compromise between the two. And COVID-19 is like the perfect example. It's like it's a disease, yet one party thinks about it one way, the other one thinks about it in another way. And it's very clear in the US. So I just want to ask you, is this different? Have you sensed that America has changed in terms of society? Because you've seen other presidents and other problems and other social problems and whatnot. Is this different? Is this worse? Is this does this smell different, feel different?
Yeah, it's very different. We're becoming very tribal in the US, where each of us in our little group believe that we're completely right, and anyone who disagrees with us is subhuman. And that's a really dangerous situation to be in. And let me give you my theory about why this is happening. There's really two parts to it. One is that starting in 1971, when we went off the last vestiges of the gold standard, the US economy has been increasingly controlled by a tiny little group of people who captured the banking system and then used that power to capture the regulatory apparatus of the government, so that now they're set up to make money no matter what. The rich keep getting richer and the poor keep getting poorer. And since most people are in the category of those getting poorer in the US, for instance, when every time we have any kind of a crisis, they cut interest rates as their solution. And that tends to push up financial asset prices, which enriches the people who already own the financial assets. So even during the COVID-19 crisis that we've had here, during the pandemic lockdown, a handful of rich people got vastly richer. So you're left with, 99% of the people out there feeling like they're not doing well, that the system isn't working for them anymore. But instead of seeing that there's a common enemy, that there's this aristocracy that has taken over the country and they really need to be addressed, what we're doing is we're filtering the difficulties of our lives through our own experiences and perspective. And some people are breaking left and deciding this is a crisis of capitalism. Other people are breaking right and deciding that people on the left are the enemy and they're the ones at fault. While the rich just keep getting richer. Now, at the same time this is happening, the media in the US has figured out that it doesn't have to present news to the broader public in order to make a lot of money. They can target a small ideological audience, and then instead of giving them objective news, they give them a news-themed entertainment show that reinforces the preconceptions of those.
Oh my God, that's so true.
Yes. So Fox News does that with confused old white people, and MSNBC does that with hyper anxious liberals. And those two groups of people never see the other side of the story. They only see the side of the story that they walked in with. And because of that, and it's fragmenting even further from there, but those are the two big groups that are being turned into bitter enemies of each other, and finding it very easy now to dehumanize each other. And so, either one of them is perfectly happy. Well, ideologically, either one of them, not necessarily all the people in either group, because a lot of the elderly aren't going to hit the streets, and a lot of extreme liberals are just they're so nonviolent that they're not going to do it either. But enough of each group is now willing to take to the streets to battle the other. And this who's laughing is the 1% in the US. This is playing into the hands of the people who just want to harvest the rest of us. Because this is an excuse to cut interest rates even further and to slap a lot of restrictions on our civil liberties and things, and which, this is liable to end with some kind of martial law with negative interest rates. So the rich who are controlling the army get richer and richer as interest rates fall further and further, which makes stock prices and bond prices go up, while the rest of us are never able to save a penny. And if we do save any money, we get a negative interest rate on it, so our capital actually shrinks. So we never are able to save for the future. And that's a really disturbing world, but it's one that we're not far from here in the U.S. Civil unrest after the next election could lead to a constitutional crisis that leads to martial law, and that's a very easy thing to see happening.
Okay.
And, you got to hope we avoid it, but right now people don't seem to get who the true enemy is, and they're focusing on each other. And unless we figure this out in a hurry, I think bigger, badder troubles are headed for us very quickly.
So John, with all of this said, I want to ask you about precious metals, because on August 5th, both gold and silver peaked. It's now been 2 months precisely. So my question to you is, do you think this was the top for precious metals, or is this just a normal correction after a 52-week or an all-time high? What are your thoughts? I've been speaking with a lot of bullion dealers just to see demand and if they can compare it to 2016 or 2011, and also looking at previous all-time highs to see what happened right after, to kind of understand where we are. What do you see?
Oh, I think this is just a foothill on the way to a mountain. It's been a nice run, and this is a normal, natural correction for this kind of a run. But fundamentally speaking, gold and silver have a long way to go, because we're continuing to make the mistakes that tend to lead to the kind of financial crises that lead money to pile into precious metals. So until we start raising interest rates again, for instance, in the U.S., or until the government stops running massive deficits and starts running surpluses, the fundamentals for gold will continue to improve, because in order to do those things that the government and the Fed are doing right now, we have to take on massive amounts of new debt. And it's that new debt that puts pressure on the currency. In other words, to get yourself out from under a massive amount of mostly bad debt, you've got to cut interest rates, you've got to lower the value of your currency, which is what the government in the US is desperately trying to do right now. And that tends to work in favor of precious metals, because when the value of the currency is falling, you eventually lose faith in it, and you need to move your money to some place that isn't going to continue to lose value. And historically, since the days of the Roman Empire or before, that's been gold and silver. Every time there's been a financial crisis in human history, precious metals have gone up in local currency terms. So there's no reason to think why this is going to be any different, because we're making all the same mistakes, just on a much, much bigger scale. And if the amount of debt matters in a dollar for dollar way with gold and silver, then you would expect gold to hit $10,000 before this cycle is over, and silver to be up in the $200 or $300 range. So we're nowhere near either of those numbers.
Interesting. Actually, very interesting, because those are big numbers, John. I didn't expect to hear that kind of prediction. So, and look, no one would be more happy than myself. I want to ask you now about what we're seeing with millennials for the past 6 months. In order to replace their income, because many of them have either been sacked or otherwise, they've turned into the stock market, they've turned into the options market, day trading, and whatnot. It looks like the September correction in the NASDAQ kind of stopped the options mania and all that. I want to ask you, for many years they've said that millennials do not save, they would not go into the stock market after 2008. We're seeing an entire generation entering the stock market now. how is this going to impact America? Because you're seeing an entire generation, 80 million people, quarter of the country, that's earning much more than they did a decade ago. So they're entering better earning years. They've not started families. They've not bought homes. There's so much ahead of them in life. Could America actually be within a golden period of a low boom from the millennial surge of house formation and entering the stock market and earning better salaries because they're inheriting baby boomer jobs?
Well, I think what happened over the last few months is that millennials, remember, they grew up playing video games. And then when the pandemic hit, the government sent out checks to every adult American. And that was basically just found money for a lot of people. So instead of hanging out and playing video games, which they might have done otherwise with their spare time during the lockdown, they discovered these free stock trading apps like Robinhood, where it doesn't cost anything to trade stocks. And when you think about it, trading stocks for free is the ultimate video game because you get instant gratification. And if you have any kind of a system that works, even if it's just for a little while, you make a lot of money. Instead of piling up points in a video game, you make actual money. So it hooked a lot of these guys, and they started doing a lot of things that can be lumped into the category of trend following. In other words, if something was going up, they jumped on board, assuming that the trend would continue for a while. And, in a lot of cases it did, because people piling into something that's already up made it go up further. So it pushed tech stocks way up. And towards the end of that process, in other words, while there was still government money, before those $1,200 checks were spent one way or another, the day traders and the other people on Robinhood discovered gold and silver mining stocks, because those things really started to rock towards the end of the process. So I think what's going to happen going forward is that the US government is getting ready to send out another set of checks. And those will, of course, go to millennials along with all the other adults. And that's liable to ignite a new round of stock speculation. Excuse me. So we might have another very interesting few months when those checks come in and are cashed and are deposited into Robinhood. And I'm thinking that it's at least possible that some of that money flows into the gold and silver miners again, because I think the people who made money off of them last time remember them. Remember them as things that go way up very quickly when they get going. So we could see more speculative money flowing into precious metals via the GLD ETF or the gold and silver mining ETFs, and even some of the small gold and silver miners themselves, which was interesting last time around. So it ought to be interesting this time around too. And that really doesn't have much to do with the long-term success of gold and silver, which is kind of etched in stone. I mean, they're going to go up over the next 5 years or so, almost guaranteed, because we're making these big fundamental mistakes. But the real action in the short run could be these Robinhood traders who are jumping on things that are going up with free money that came from the government. So that could be the story of early 2021 when those checks start to hit and the action starts again in momentum stocks.
Hey, I want to ask you a few quick questions with quick answers if you're ready. So one thing I want to ask you is, why have people stopped talking about where the origin of COVID is? I've heard nothing about China in the news for like 2 months. What do you think that is?
Well, I'm still seeing stuff. I mean, it's considered outside the mainstream, which means you can't really, you can't post it on Facebook or Twitter without risking your account being shut down. So we've got this kind of surveillance capitalism censorship going on right now, where you aren't allowed to say things that are outside of the mainstream in some cases. And the COVID thing is one of those cases. although there in the alternative media, there's still a lot of discussion of this. I mean, I think it's kind of taken as conventional wisdom in at least the right wing of unconventional media, that, yeah, this was a virus that was engineered in China, and it either was released on purpose or it accidentally got released from the lab. But it's not a naturally occurring virus; it's man-made, and you know, as such, it's kind of a bioweapon. So this might be the first, although it might be accidental, but it might be the first bioweapon attack that has been widespread. So you know, it might be a in retrospect, a very important event in history, because it's just the first bioweapon attack, you know, and there might be more coming. But yeah, I think that there's definitely censorship of that idea going on. So you won't see it in the mainstream press, but you will see it in the alternative press.
Okay. Another thing I want to ask you is why nobody wants to bet on who's going to win the election. I've asked this question on many interviews, and everyone's like, it's too unpredictable, too unpredictable, too unpredictable. Do you think it's going to come down to like the last minute? Because the polls don't show it that way.
Well, yeah, the polls look like a Biden landslide right this minute, but the polls weren't trustworthy last time around, because Trump tends to do much better than the polling suggests. So it might be closer than it looks like it's going to be. Plus, you know, we have another month, we have more debates, and all kinds of things can happen. You know, either of these candidates are capable of just totally blowing themselves out of the water with some really outrageous statement or some revelation about past corruption or something like that. And that adds to the unpredictability of this election. So yeah, I don't want to predict anything either, because there really is no way to know what's going to happen. And there is no way to know who's going to cheat this time. I suspect that both sides are trying to figure out how to cheat effectively. And you know, it's just a question of whether one of them figures it out and the other doesn't, or neither one does, or they both do, you know, so that you can't predict how this is going to go. I think the biggest or the highest probability prediction is that it's going to be chaotic. You know, that's the only thing you can say with any kind of certainty this time around.
Okay. I want to ask you about real estate. Many people are actually buying real estate as the first homes. They're moving out of cities into the suburbs, etc. Home builder stocks are surging. And I want to ask you, in general, what do you think about the housing market in the United States right now when it pertains to obviously not office buildings and everything that's COVID impacted, but everything that's actually in high demand and moving forward?
Well, this surprised the hell out of me. I would have expected, because historically, whenever there's a deep recession, housing gets whacked. Home prices either stop rising or they drop like they did last time around. And this time they didn't miss a beat. They actually accelerated their increase as we dropped into the recession that was caused by the pandemic lockdown. So that continues to surprise me. And I think part of it was due to mortgage forbearance. We allowed a lot of people to stay in their houses even though they couldn't make their mortgage payments. So that decrease the supply of houses on the market, because people who might have been forced to sell in previous recessions got to stick around this time around. And interest rates are historically low, so mortgages are cheap. And as you said, people in cities feel like they need to move out of cities in a lot of cases. And that's increasing demand in suburbs and rural areas. But beyond that, I don't know. I still think a recession should cause a slowdown or a crash in the housing market, and we haven't seen it yet.
So you think we're in a recession or in recovery?
Well, we were in a recession. We were in a very deep recession for at least 3 months. And now we're coming back, but not as quickly as they would have hoped, because the stimulus money has dried up in the US. So we're not creating a lot of new currency and giving it to people yet. And I think that another month of bad numbers, if it hasn't happened already, will cause the government to do another stimulus program that's as big as the last one. And if they do that, then, you know, then you get growth because people will spend all that money, but it'll be borrowed money flowing into the system. It won't be, healthy growth or anything. It'll just be the government borrowed even more money and handed it to people, which eventually puts pressure on the currency. There's a limit to how much debt a country can take on before people don't want to hold its currency anymore. And I think that's what the big countries, the U.S. and Europe and Japan are facing now. The major economies of the world are all taking on way too much debt.
Yeah,
And
they're definitely testing the limits.
yeah, well, yeah, we're going to find out what the limits are. Put it that way. We don't know exactly where they are, but they're taking us a lot closer to wherever those limits are. And that's going to cause a currency crisis of some sort in the not too distant future. And when that happens, in other words, when the value of the dollar, let's say, starts falling, then that takes away all the tools that governments have now to manipulate the economy. And when people figure out that there's nothing left, the government does not have any tools left in the toolbox to keep the economy from crashing, that's when things get really crazy. Because right now, people still think it's fixable. They think, well, at least in my case, if the government gives me a bunch of money, I'll be okay, and then my neighbors will be too. And it's true. As long as dollars are valuable, the government can keep you away from a crisis by giving you more dollars, but you can't do that forever. So that's the big story out there, I think, is when all the debt that we're taking on now, all the currency that we're creating now, begins to impact the value of the major currencies of the world, and then
In a visible way, in a
Yes.
way that scares the average person. Where can people check out your work, your articles, and everything else that you're up to?
Well, I run dollarclaps.com, which is a continuously updated website that covers this stuff, and it's also where I post my own thoughts 2 or 3 times a week. So there's a join our email list button you can click on, put your email address in there, and then you'll get everything I produce going forward.
Thank you very much, Sean, for being here.
Thanks, Lior. Enjoyed it.